Well, welcome to this week's Spark Me podcast. Michelle Dempsey is here, and I'm Liz Graham, and we're super excited about this week's guest. She's a phenomenal woman. But before we get started on that, let's just do a check-in with each other, Michelle.
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't know if you want to share with everybody what you've been going through.
I do, because I think this really does relate to the conversation we're about to have with our incredible guest, who I just she blew me and you away. And that's I've entered a new. I feel like I've entered a completely new um, parallel universe. I am now navigating at least this world without my parents, without both of them. And I kind of let myself really go through the mourning phase, Liz. So I'm here to say it's time to celebrate their lives, and I have gone through the deep feels, and I think we all have to do that. The crying till you can't breathe, and, and just remembering and how much you miss them. And I recall you saying once that one of your friends said she felt untethered.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful analogy that is, and how right it is. But what has been the tether, what has kind of brought me back to shore, are the people around me that I'm surrounded with. My immediate siblings, we've just stayed close. My parents, we've been so proud of the beautiful relationship that we all have and how we just supported each other. And even tonight, we're going to have our family dinner like we did every Sunday. They're not with us anymore, but we're still going to continue that tradition. And my immediate friends who just continue to reach out and say, "Are you okay?" and send me something funny or something heartwarming, or those who have also lost their parents or both parents, kind of just really know how to check in. It's something you don't know till you know, right? I think Conan O'Brien said once, you can't explain to somebody what it's like to be underwater until you've been underwater, right? It's just a place that you have to experience to know it. And then just people in the community, someone who I don't even know, who just my father meant so much to, just calling to tell me how much he meant to them. So it's this incredible sense of community buoying me up. When those moments you feel like you could sink or that you're untethered and you could float away, it's been beautiful. It's been really, really beautiful. And I'm so grateful to the people in my lives and those people who I don't even know who reached out to let me know what my dad meant to them, because he meant so much to me, and both my parents did. And so that's kind of what happened this week, over the past couple weeks, actually. But I just, love my dad so much. And one of the things I want to say to everybody is, if you still have your parents with you, pick up that phone and call them tonight, right?
Absolutely.
Go out for a dinner. My dad and I had dinner every Wednesday, and I left nothing on the table with either of my parents. And that's a great feeling, but I had the opportunity and the time with them to do that, to really think that through. And so that's that is a good piece of the puzzle here, is I said everything that needed to be said.
Well, I think that, unfortunately, this phase of life that we're in, and you're like a little bit ahead of me in navigating it,
Yeah.
is something that so many people can relate to, and that losing that person that you had that shared history with, right? That you could laugh with over the same stories that you told a million times, a million times.
Yeah.
You rolled your eyes when you're, but that reminds me of that story, and you're like, what they're gonna say. But it's that shared history together that is so important. And I guarantee you that your parents are so proud of the family they built. I mean, your family is incredibly successful in business, but I guarantee you that your parents are most proud of the family they built, and how connected you guys are, how supportive you are of each other. That's a true legacy, and you should be proud of it. And I am sure that they are proud of it.
You're so right, Liz. They're I think that was their pride in themselves too, the family they built together, because they did it together, and they did a great job. I mean, they were just awesome. Not perfect. I did not say perfect.
Nobody is perfect.
But they were pretty phenomenal. My dad was that guy who would listen to. He just wouldn't get bored if you told him, "You could talk about work or education," and he was like, it woke him up. Whereas my mom would be like, but yeah. And the thing is, it's like you realize that the phone calls, like, I'm like, who am I trying to make proud now?
Right.
You have to believe they're still here.
Yeah.
You have to believe that they're still in your heart, or with you in some way, and that you still want to make them proud and live your life in a way that would make them proud, right? Because that's kind of who it was for,
Right.
in some ways, not in
Yeah,
every
of
way, right? In
course.
some ways, though. So yeah, so that's something I was navigating this week, and the community came through in a huge way that I'm really, really grateful for. How about yourself?
Well, I think that going to be a similar theme on the theme of community. A friend of mine owns a restaurant, and owning a restaurant in today's
Oh
day,
boy. Yeah, yeah.
no easy feat. And she really hustles to make this business work. And there's a business her father started, and she's owned it for like almost 30 years, I think. And so she had trivia night on Tuesday night, and at the last minute, she posted on social media, "I have a couple of tables. Come in. You don't have to have a team. Come in as a single." And a gentleman came in and said to her, I've been really depressed, and I was
Hmm.
really thinking about taking my own life.
What?
And I saw your message, and it reminded me that there are other people out there, and so I came to trivia night tonight.
God.
And she was so floored that something that doesn't seem like anything, like just putting out there to come, meant so much to this person. And of course, now she knows where he is, mentally, and is checking in on him all the time, and trying to help them navigate this period. But what it reminded me is the importance of connection and community, that
Mhm.
you can have people that seem like they've got it all going on, and they're at home, and they're alone, and they're in isolation. And that is life shortening in a variety of ways.
For sure.
Um,
And probably way more people like that than we think. But even people who have friends and loved ones in community, like, sometimes can still feel that way.
yeah,
Like, because people's lives are busy and don't always have time,
right.
right? And so it oh God, that is such a powerful story. But I'll be honest, I think there's moments I haven't felt depressed to that point, but where I felt like, um, I'm single, right? And you don't have that natural partner
Right.
to do all those things, right? And I think life kind of at this stage gets set up for that sometimes,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And so there will, from time to time, even I have the greatest friends and family, but from time to time I'll be like, I really would like to do something tonight, but
Yeah.
nobody's around,
Right.
And so what if that's your life all, like, you have many of those nights. I can imagine that is, God, that is a powerful story. And it makes me wonder, is there more stuff that could be out there for those? Like, it was come if you're like, come to this quiz night, even if you don't have a
Right.
team,
Exactly.
right? Like, that's why I miss the bookstore,
Right.
right? Like, these places where you can go,
Mm.
like, you're not you don't have to walk in with somebody. You can just be you, and come there and meet people, right?
I mean, I think it's interesting because, in this age of social media, right,
Mhm.
where we are all on our phone, and this is supposed to replace like person to person connection, right?
Yeah.
We're on this community, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, social media platform you're on. The truth of the matter is nothing replaces human connection.
No, nothing. Amen.
Does.
Yeah.
And so part of what we wanted to do with Spark Me,
Mhm.
that was part of the plan all along. You and I talked about this, and you were insistent, and I was right on board that this needs to also include a community component.
Mhm.
And of course, geographically, some of it may be online, but as much as we can, we want to create in person human connection communities, with Spark Me.
Yeah.
And
And we'll figure out a way to do it,
yeah,
to have meetups with each other,
exactly.
or in your individual communities, the people listening who can meet each other in your communities. But we want people to meet face to face and form real relationships that way, so we never feel alone.
And I think our next guest, Beth Twohy, she talks about how being part of a community in her interview is probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting that without even having the background that we just shared, community is essential for her.
Essential.
Um,
In fact, and it's not like she had it easy, like she just grew up in a place that she was her whole life and had a community that naturally grew around her.
right.
She found herself several times in her life, including right now, in different places where her first goal was, I need to make my community. I need to find my people.
Absolutely.
And like made it actually a mission to, and because she knew she had to do it. And those are the stories she's going to tell. I can't wait for people to hear. And so maybe without further ado, we tell you a little bit about Beth and then get right to it. So Beth is um, one of the most fascinating people I've ever talked to. She's just like very down to earth and so easy to speak to, but she is also like a strategic business leader. She's skilled at predictive analytics. She worked for pretty much her whole career at Procter and Gamble, right? In their predictive analytics department, she was involved in STEM before we even knew what STEM was or it had a term, right? A terminology. She has she's worked on breakthrough initiatives for iconic brands like Olay, CoverGirl, Dolce Gabbana. I mean, really, like she's been doing it.
I think that's amazing that she was able to take sort of a engineering style background and move it into women's health and women's fashion and marry the two, right? Like I don't think people think that you could have a career
Yeah.
dealing with these famous brands and in data analytics.
Yeah. I didn't know her career existed until she talked to us, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the interesting thing to me. And now she's sort of moved into sort of a chapter 2 of her career where she's working for Baltimore public schools and using her skill set in data analytics to help improve education.
Yeah, I mean, I think that aspect of her story, our listeners are going to love. At least I did. I walked away from this interview so inspired by Beth and what she has accomplished.
Improving educational outcomes is something like means a lot to me or anybody, period, but especially anybody with kids who, understanding where education's at right now. And that's a whole bigger conversation. But Beth is also the proud mother of 2 successful kids.
Yeah.
And her husband is an architect, much like myself. And that's how I met Beth through her awesome husband. And so she just brings a unique blend of precision and creative insight to things. And so without further ado, here is Beth Twohy. And I just want to kind of let the listeners know how I know you, Beth, and kind of bringing you to the table here. So your husband is Peter Twohy, and he is an architect, and he is in what we call a little mastermind architects group. It's almost like a little cult we have for many years, and he has just always spoken so highly of you. And we finally got to meet, and it was even. How could it have been better than what he said? I don't know, but it was. So there you go. You just yeah.
Thank you.
So here we are, and we just kind of want to get right into it, just obviously it sparked me. What we want to do is like spark great conversations and talk about, entering the second act of life and what that's going to be all about. So what have we been through? Where were we, where are we, and where are we going kind of are the things we want to look at. So kind of understanding you and who you are. Can you share with us, what inspired you to go into predictive analytics? I mean, was that even in your sphere when you were younger? Was that something like that, or was it you just like math, or how? Like, what was sort of the first moment when you realized that And I don't think STEM was even a word back then, like was even a thing, right? But like, how did your journey start in this analytical world?
Yeah, well, I think like with everything, you look back and you go, "Oh, that was an interesting path I followed." I think my interest in math and science started very early. So that was always something, in school that I enjoyed. I never really understood what engineering was, but my dad was an engineer. And so he was the first one that, sort of encouraged me to consider engineering. Um, and so I picked that as the major I was going to have in college without really knowing much about what he did. But knowing, based on what he said, you like math and science, you're going to like engineering. Um, and then the only thing that was sort of a childhood spark that, sort of clicked for me in college was we used to go on these factory tours, and I always loved them. I found them fascinating and just watching how things got made. And when I was in college, I learned that there was a track for in mechanical engineering, which was what I was studying for manufacturing management. So that was what my first job was in Procter& Gamble, was to manage a production line, which, to me was like nirvana. That was always what I thought I would, was interested in and was very excited when I first started at P&G.
Wait, Nirvana was a manufacturing production line?
Exactly, I know.
I just wanna make sure I heard that right, Nirvana or manufacturing production line.
I was so excited, my line of 300 bottles a minute. I was fascinated by it. But pretty quickly I realized running the line was very different than what I had anticipated because I was managing the people running the line. I was not working with the equipment. I was really just running an operation of 35 employees, which, there were a whole bunch of things going on in my plant at the time. And so pretty quickly, I realized that what I thought was my dream job was not my dream job at all. It was a 3-shift operation. It was, everybody in my hiring class, with the exception of me, was gone within 3 years. Um, so, here I was at Procter& Gamble, this very big company in Cincinnati, meeting a lot of people doing interesting things in other parts of the company. And that's when I started to make the move into research and development based on hearing the interesting things they were doing. And so, when I made that first step of asking to switch in the company to a different role, which very few people ever did. And, for me, it was a decision between, well, do I leave and do something else? Or do I stay with this really reputable company and try to find a way to do something that, was more what I envisioned, for how I could channel my education. And that turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life because I moved into an area of the company that was growing as we went international, in the 80s, a long time ago, as P&G was expanding internationally, and it was just absolutely fabulous. I was, basically leading product development of how we customized our products that were made for US people for what global needs were for Asia and for Europe. And that led to a 3-year stint in Germany where my husband and I moved to help start up our innovation center in Germany. So, it opened up a whole new world to me about engineering, about product development, and all these global opportunities as a result. So that was sort of the next step. And then through that, I got involved in what was sort of the starting point of um, what we call now predictive analytics. At that time, Procter& Gamble does this unique thing in research that's called consumer research. And it's a blend of sort of traditional market research, which is understanding consumer needs and market strategies and, what products are right for people, combined with traditional laboratory research, which is, okay, what are the technical things that need to be done to make these products? And my role sat at the intersection of that. And so a lot of what, predictive analytics are, we sort of think of that as AI now, is how do you, with a limited amount of what you know, predict something new and of the future? And so that's where I started developing, what are the test methods and what are the technical criteria to build these equations that would predict this brand new product. So you don't make 1,000 of those different kind of variables. You predict, oh, these 3 or 4 might be the ones that hunt, and then you develop those and test those. So that's sort of where I started in the, early 90s, and then continued to do more and more of that from there, and that sort of became the cornerstone of my career.
Beth, I'm curious, were there many women when you started out at Procter& Gamble in your
Uh,
field?
it's interesting because again, this is one of those very lucky things for me. In general, P&G was growing their hiring of women, specifically into the R&D roles. But I moved into new businesses that were much more 50-50 balanced in terms of women and men. The traditional businesses in P&G, like laundry, Tide is one of the big P&G brands, or um, Pampers, which is, one of the biggest brands in the company. Those were more dominant with men, and especially men in leadership positions. But the areas that I was moving into internationally were, brand new, lots of young people moving into them, lots of women. And so I never felt at that stage like I was in the minority at all. And then I moved from what was our global business into our beauty care businesses. And there was, even in many cases, a majority of women because it was beauty care that moved into that area. And at one point in time, my entire line management, all the way up to the chief operating officer of our R&D division, were all women. I mean, it was amazing.
Wow.
I had like 4 dotted lines of women all the way up. So, that was an area, even though my education in college, there was 10% female. Once I moved into the workforce, I uniquely had the experience where I didn't really feel, in any way that I was a minority. Now, I would go to some meetings where I would sit there and go, "Huh, I'm the only woman at the table." But those were rare. Those, most of the time my daily work was far more balanced.
Gee, that says a lot about Procter& Gamble, truthfully.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah.
And then it has consistently been one of the top rated companies for women in many areas. There's a lot of areas where it was, I wouldn't say on the forefront of offering a lot of benefits and focused on retaining women, but clearly, for one of the, big Fortune 20 companies, was an early adopter of a lot of things that help to develop women, help to promote women in leadership positions, and acknowledge early on the flexibility that was needed to retain women, especially in the early years after having children, when they tended to lose a lot of women in the workforce.
Yeah, I imagine that happens in architecture too.
Yeah.
I just have to go back because I'm laughing at you said diapers were male dominated.
They were. I know. Isn't that interesting?
Like, what? That's the only place that they're male dominated.
I know.
I feel like every woman listening to this podcast should turn to their husband and say, "Look, men have diapers. They understand it better than women." I heard on this podcast.
Yeah, all over it.
Well, that's the irony in P&G. Here's this consumer products company, mainly developing and marketing products that, especially when it started with soap, to women, developing products and manufacturing products, primarily by men. And so, that's, I think, where as more and more women entered the company and the workforce, there wasn't this translation gap of what do women want. We were bringing in not only personal experience, but we were better able to hear what our consumers were saying, to be like, they're saying this, but they really mean this. So I think that also really helped in many ways, from a career development standpoint.
It's a little bit of the opposite of Steve Jobs going, "I'll tell them what they want."
Yes.
You're sort of like, there truly is a science behind figuring out what consumers might want, being able to put it to market so that it's not just a big guessing game.
Exactly.
It's such an interesting field, Beth, and again, I don't think no little girl I've ever talked to grows up and says, "I wanna do predictive analytics when I grow up," right? Do you feel like you tripped into it? Like, it seems like there's a lot in your career that you say, I feel lucky, like, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. I ended up at this company that really supported women. This part of the job I didn't love, and I took the initiative to look into another part of the company. I guess the first question is, do you think young women particularly, and I would say young men too, know that jobs like this exist? Like, when does this come into the sphere of possibility?
Yeah,
right?
that's a
'Cause
great question. I think so. First of all, you make your own luck. So, yes, I feel very lucky. And, part of when I was doing my job search, I had interned at a couple different companies. One was a military subcontractor, and my father had worked for that military subcontractor. And I knew that I did not want to work on a weapon system. That obviously, was how I grew up and put food on the table. But it was like, I don't think I want to do that. I've seen enough of this through an internship to know I don't want to do that. And so, part of when I was applying, I was looking around at companies and talking to my classmates who had interned at different companies, which is how I learned about Procter Gamble, but also how I got some understanding of what the culture of the company was like, what, my, um, classmates' experiences were in their different companies for who I wanted to consider. So, I didn't know exactly what I was getting into, but I knew I was making a choice not to do, what I had experienced or what I had, heard about from other companies to a company that I'd heard something favorable about. And then as I moved from manufacturing into research and development, again, I had the experience of people I was talking to. This is an early form of networking. I was talking to friends, my social group,
Mhm.
going, "Wow, I like your job. Your job sounds really cool." Um, but I think most importantly, I knew what I was doing was not what I wanted to be doing 5 to 10 years from now. It was barely what I imagined doing 6 months from now. So it's like I need to make a change before I start looking around at other companies. Let me figure out if there's something here. And, I think at every step of my career journey, I have been um, very deliberate about trying to make sure I, considered all options that were that I knew enough about to make the next step. Not necessarily the next 20 steps, but the next step. It may not get me exactly where I needed to go, but would it get me closer to where I thought? And then if it wasn't right, how do I course correct? I've done that a few times. I've navigated quite a different path through P&G that's not typical. In many ways. And, I've made some mistakes too in my career. And part of it was like, well, that didn't work. Okay, let me see if I can try something else and not being afraid to admit that and try to move in a different direction.
Would you share an example of one of those
Sure.
moments?
Yeah. So I at one point decided I wanted to move out of research and development. We the site that I was at in Baltimore, looked like the research and development part of the organization might have to move to Cincinnati, and I didn't want to move. My husband had his business in Baltimore, so I asked to move into our market research organization, and that very specifically focused, on your traditional market research and advertising support. And I moved into that organization. I learned a lot. Again, decided pretty quickly, wow, I don't like this at all. I really felt like I was providing a lot of information to our brand managers and to our R&D organization, but I really didn't own or control anything. I could recommend, but marketing could decide what copy they wanted to use. I could
Mhm.
recommend to research and development, what the data said, but they could decide what to do with it. And so after 2 years of that, I, sort of hung my head low, went back to my old it wasn't even my old manager anymore. There was a new leader who didn't know me at all and said, I used to work in this organization. I was pretty well respected in this organization. I moved, into market research and I'd like to come back. Would you take me back? And they didn't have the headcount at the time. So it was like, okay, well, I asked and now I got to decide, am I going to stick it out here in market research? Am I going to wait till something comes up? And, or do I leave, because I knew I didn't want to stay doing what I was doing. And I decided to wait it out. And, a couple months later, something opened up and they brought me back. And, I had lost some ground in terms of my career in the research and development organization. And I'd certainly lost some sponsors who had moved on. But like, okay, well, here we go. Let's move forward and take it from here. And that then opened up other things. So that's that was one of, a couple times where it's like, okay, well, let me try to get closer to where I thought I wanted to go because this move wasn't the right one.
So you mentioned Beth, that you did a lot of travel, like that you had some opportunities to go to, you said Germany, and I think you mentioned some other places you might have gotten to go. And so now I'm just thinking in my head, and so you've got this kind of really successful career, kind of well respected, moving up the ladder, it seems pretty quickly, a little bit of a powerhouse in your research and development field. Um, but also now I imagine somewhere along that line becoming a mom
Yeah.
and, getting married, becoming a mom, and now juggling all of that at the same time. So how how did you at that time manage to balance, the career while also balancing your role as a mom and as a wife and as a daughter? And did you have any strategies that you used? Did you sort of just figure out your way through it? How how did you how did you manage that part of your life?
Yeah, yes and yes.
Yes.
So, when we came back from Germany when I was pregnant with our first child. And that was part of the reason we came back. We could have stayed longer. So we had been there 3 years, and I had, made we'd made the deliberate decision. We were having the first grandchild on both sides of the family that we wanted to be in the US. And that was not well received by my German leadership because they'd invested a lot to bring me there. And it was not a particularly good time for the company. And I asked not to go back to Cincinnati, which is our corporate headquarters. That's where most of the jobs were. There was this little business we had just acquired in Baltimore, that was the Noxell company. That was the CoverGirl and Max Factor brands at the time. And I said, I'd like to go to Baltimore. Part of the reason we ended up going to Germany was that, the architecture environment at the time in Cincinnati wasn't great. And we knew going back, it wasn't going to be great for my husband. So I said, could I move to this Baltimore organization? And they're like, what? What are you talking about? And again, there wasn't a job at the time. And I said, well, you have to move me back. So I'll either, leave the company at the end of my maternity leave, or if a job opens up in Baltimore, then, great. I hope that I can get it. And if not, I understand you don't owe me anything. So we moved to Baltimore, and, we were closer to family than in Germany, but, really not close. My husband's parents were 4 hours away. My parents were 7 hours away, but that was closer than Cincinnati, and the job prospects for my husband were better. And very quickly, I knew that I needed a community. I could not do this by myself. We found good childcare, and when our second child was born, I asked to work part-time. Now, again, this is one where P&G was on the forefront of offering a part-time track for a limited amount of time, but not for my level. And so they were like, no, that's not for, people at your level. That's for people lower in the organization. And I'm like, well, okay. Can we try it? Can I show you that I can do this job while working part-time? And so I negotiated a 3-month trial, which turned into 14 years. I had to renew it at every year and every management change to say, hey, is this working? And, it meant that, like with a full-time job, most people work more than 48 hours a week when they have a full-time job. When my, 60% job was working much, much more than, the hours that I was getting paid for. But it gave me that flexibility that I could have time, with the kids when they were younger. I could navigate around the school schedule as they started school. And most importantly to me, I showed what was possible to our leadership, that they opened up this benefit to more levels in the organization. And, one of my regrets was I didn't make more noise about that to let other people know, and specifically other women know. I was just felt so fortunate for a while that I could do this, that I just sort of kept my head down and didn't advertise it. But whenever I found women that were struggling and trying to figure out, oh, do I have to give up this promotion because I have kids, I want to work part-time. I'm like, well, I work part-time. And most of the time they're like, you do? And I'm like, yeah, I've been doing it for a few years. So this is an option for you. And it was only after, I don't know, like 5 years of doing this that I started to drive more awareness to the choice that I had made. And how I approached it with my managers to get that support. So, between working part-time and building a wonderful community of friends where were sort of in similar situations. And when school was closed, this family in the neighborhood would chip in one week and, I would chip in another week, and we would do different things to, help, sort of be the village to help each other out through those years. And that continued all through the school age years until my kids were in high school, and that's when I went back to full time.
Beth, it's so interesting to me that there's this theme running through your career where you have advocated for yourself and your needs and your family's needs. And I think oftentimes women don't feel like they have the power to advocate for themselves. And what I'm hearing from you is you just do it. And and if it doesn't work out, then there's another path, right?
I think that is, one of the key things that I try to tell other people is, you have to be willing to take the risk. I had to be willing to leave. And it wasn't an idle threat. It was this isn't working for me. So, let's try this. If this is not an option, then yeah, I'm going to go do something else. I had to make peace with that for myself. A couple times it, sort of blew up in my face, but, most of the time by, leaning forward and asking and, having, again, I had great mentors and sponsors where I would try to work through all the possibilities beforehand before I would have those hard discussions. But yeah, most of the time it was like, well, if this could be like this, it would be worth it to me. And if not, then I got to figure out something else. And having that really hard conversation with myself first, and then being realistic with my managers about, what I needed to do next. And, in general, it worked much, much more often than not. But, it's risky every time. You have to be prepared for that.
I love that. I think that lesson is so huge because I was thinking about it, I'm like, that was such a baller move. Like, but I love it, right? You're like, listen, this is what I'm gonna do. And what I really love is like you didn't make it an ultimatum, an all or nothing, right? It was like,
Right.
it's like,
Mhm.
listen, give me a chance. Why don't we just try it on? Just try the code on. Let's just see if it fits. If it doesn't fit, all that's fine. And every year you renewed, and so there was never too much risk, right? On the other side, you mitigated the risk, and I think that's like so important. When I got my first job, this is what it reminded me of, Beth. When I got my first job offer, they were like, I think it was the end of my interview, and I really wanted to work at this firm, and it was the only firm I wanted to work at. And I was like, listen, I said, I'm young and single. I'm mobile. I can live off nothing. I'm like, so if this doesn't work out, just fire me. It's fine. Like, I'm like, you don't like, just give me a chance though, because I know if you give me a chance, I'm going to show you that I won't let you down basically. Right. And then, of course it worked out and it was great. And it was,
Mhm.
My first dream job. So, there was that same thing. I was trying to mitigate the risk for them. Like, I get it. Like, you're afraid of hiring someone. It's a big commitment
Mhm.
my family hired people. I know that. I know you have to be careful. And so it's like, I just wanted to let them know, like, hey, give me a little time to let you know if it doesn't work. It's cool. So that's really awesome that you did that. I love that. And while doing it, kind of knowing it, not knowing it, like doing it because that's what worked for your life. I'm sure you've made that possible now for other people. Like within that organization or people in your community who you talk to who know you did that, and the people who are listening to this right now are now also understanding that this is a possibility. You can design your life. It seems like that's what you did along the way. Like, here's what I need to design, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but this is what's I need to figure out something that works for my current situation.
Absolutely. And the other key thing too is I was patient. These conversations didn't just happen once.
Right.
And I could always and completely understood my manager's position. There isn't a head count. I can't add you to my budget now. I'm like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
I know there are things that you can't control. So I'll wait, I'm going to wait 3 months and then let's revisit it. Or, I know this isn't a policy and
Yeah.
we have to get HR involved and all that. So, let's try it on and let's see if they'll try it on without making any big, bold statement and use this as a study model. And so, that's the other. It was never an ultimatum, but it was also very much coming from, okay, how do we make this a win-win? And, really honoring and understanding what my manager's limitations were, for what flexibility they could provide as well.
And I also love that community plays a big part in all of this, because it's that, like you said, you went to a new place, you formed a community. It seems like that it's kind of like you intrinsically knew that was one of the first things you had to do, right?
Oh, yes,
Like I
absolutely.
I need backup. Right? Like
I
my
would go with
family's
the stroller
super
in the neighborhood, like, who's here? Who can I talk to? Who are my friends?
Yeah. And and that's part of why Liz and I are doing this, because we feel like we need to build that community. Like we can do it virtually, and we want to be able to do it in person too, like where we can, support each other and lift each other up because of exactly what you're talking about. You can't do it alone sometimes. Like it when the kids have off school, I love that sharing, like we're going to their house and their house and their house. That's huge. That is so huge. That is such a big, awesome thing. So I love that community is like another sort of thread here through everything. Which brings us like then to the shift. So now after this long and storied career at Procter and Gamble, you are now shifting your focus in life and entering, let's call it the second act, right? Here we go into the second act. So now you're dedicating your time to empowering young people and improving education. What inspired this new chapter, and how are you using your superpowers, your unique set of skills in this new chapter? Like, how did this come about?
Well, some of it was planned and some of it wasn't, like always. I have to say I had always wanted when I retired to go into education. I had anticipated, and again, this is how well you know your own path, right? I had thought I would teach. I had always been a firm believer in finding a way to make the world a better place, provide some social good. Now, people will argue and they always say, yeah, but you worked on cosmetics, you developed cosmetics, that made the world a better place. I'm like, yeah, I wanted to do something a little more than that. um, and as I was preparing to leave P&G, I was working on getting my teaching certification. And math teachers, specifically high school math teachers, and this is pre-pandemic, are you know there are not enough of them, and especially not in public education. And a lot of classrooms, even pre-pandemic, for high school math are manned by substitute teachers, which is horrible, because especially in any kind of STEM field, high school math and specifically algebra is sort of the cornerstone of any kind of STEM development. And if you don't have a good teacher connecting with kids and unlocking that potential, you just close off so many doors. So that was sort of what my vision was. Now, it all happened a lot earlier than I expected because my, business in Baltimore was sold to a competitor. And so at that point in time, I was like, oh, from P&G, I was given the opportunity to go back to the company in Cincinnati, but in Cincinnati. And we didn't want to move. So I took the job for 2 years, flying back and forth each week until we got our kids through college. But at that point in time, I'm like, okay, well, now I'm going to do this. This is earlier than I had planned, but let's get ready to, that's when I was working on my certification. And at that point in time, one of my colleagues who had left at the time I did from the Baltimore organization 2 years earlier, had moved into education, but she had moved into this analytics organization. And, I was talking to her about teaching positions, and she's like, will you come in and talk to the people on my team? There's a bunch of people who were teachers who are on my team, and you can understand this role and understand what their teaching experience is like, because I know you'll be a great teacher. You'll impact 200, 300 kids in a high school by teaching. But if you take your skills, which we are having a really difficult time finding people to take these roles because, these skills are highly valuable in industry. Public education doesn't pay very much. We just can't get people to fill these roles. you'll impact all 80,000 students in our school system. And like she put on the hard sell to me, and I went in and I talked to people and I was like, all right, I'll give it a try. I have my certification. I can always go back to teaching and I can always start teaching or shift to teaching, but let me try on this role. And again, I really knew absolutely nothing about it. But she convinced me to give it a try. And I have to say, it's been so much more than I ever expected. And I started in August 2019. Had I started teaching, I would have been just getting my sea legs when the pandemic hit. And I don't know that I could have navigated all of that. I just don't know that would have had enough competency in teaching, period, to be able to then pivot to handle all of what, challenged teachers during the time period in those early years of the pandemic and moving to virtual teaching. I watched some of the best teachers struggle with that, and we've lost so many teachers through the process. I know my own limitations. I know that I probably would not have handled that well, or I would have killed myself trying. I was able to help in a very different way through that time period, and I'm just really grateful that I learned about this opportunity and have been able to be a part of this organization in that way.
And so what's next for it? What are the plans?
Well, that's the next stage of my journey. I'm here in Colorado right now, and here we go again. I'm making another exception in my career. We were working virtually like most people for the first year plus following the pandemic, but now everybody in our organization is basically back to work at least 3 days in the office, and we have made the decision that, we want to move and ultimately be in our retirement close to family. And I have family in Colorado, and we sort of went around the country and we're like, okay, here's where our family is scattered. Which city do we want to try to, land and start to, make the stepping stones of getting there? And we picked Colorado. We bought, a property here, and we've been, transitioning to making this ultimately where we want to retire. And so I asked, can I work remotely from here? Nobody else is working fully remotely anymore. Would I be able to do this and at least go back and forth for a while we get our home set up here? And so I am. And until we're able to hire a replacement in my role, I'll be able to work from here. Now, that could be a month. That could be 3 years, depending on, how difficult it is to fill the position. But because I'm, been able to show that I'm a valuable member of the team, my leadership has said, yep, okay, we understand. We want to keep you as long as we can. We'd like you to train your replacement, and, hopefully we'll be able to find somebody quickly. But if not, we are willing to work with you remotely as long as you can continue to do the job.
I'm really curious, how are you using the predictive analytics to impact education? Like, what does that mean?
Well, it's interesting because I'm doing probably only a small portion of my role is now predictive. A lot of it is helping to guide education strategies. So there's a lot of data in education. If you think about, if you have kids, they go into school, there's attendance taken. That's data. There is every single grade that they have. There is, all sorts of information about, tardiness and when they show up to school, or suspensions and causes of behavior problems in the classroom. All of that's data. Some of that has to be reported at a federal level, some reported at the state level, some of it is within the district or within a school. But as a principal, they have a budget. They've got to figure out where am I going to put teachers? How am I going to address the needs of my school? In, the school system right now, literacy, kids are trying to recover from, pandemic learning loss. And it's like, okay, there's so many kids with so many needs. How do I prioritize where I put my resources, where I put tutoring, which kids get it? Because I don't have enough money for tutoring for everybody. And so a lot of what I do is take all of that data and assemble it and look at different ways to identify who are the children most at risk, what are the interventions that are working, who are the next children to get resources if we can't provide resources for everybody. One of the first things I did in the pandemic is when we moved to virtual learning, we're very, challenged school system, an urban school system pretty typically. There were only a few schools that all students had computers, and these are not students in many cases that had access to computers at home. So we're 80,000 students in the system. We got a donation of 5,000 computers. So we're the first 5,000 kids to get those. How do you identify them? So we looked at what's the data that we have, how to identify who's the most at risk, who has access to the internet. Doesn't do you much good if you have a computer but no internet. We got school buses where they put in, internet service and Wi-Fi. So how do we identify where those buses would be parked so that these amount of students could be able to get access to the internet? So those are all the different ways we're using data to drive decisions, to target resources, and to evaluate what's working or addressing educational needs for our students.
Wow. That's so impressive.
So cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So it sounds also very fulfilling. And so right now, Beth, it just seems like you're doing this job that uses your skills, that is helping others, sort of like for someone like you, the personality that you have, I imagine in a lot of ways, that's very fulfilling and like a dream job in some ways. So right now, what are some of your biggest challenges like in life? We're just in this phase of life, and it's part of the reasons that Liz and I got together, just, empty nesting and, careers, sometimes at the height of our careers while we're empty nesting or raising kids, and then, and then figuring out what's next and how to remain fulfilled, in the next chapter. So what right now are your biggest challenges? And then conversely, what are your greatest opportunities?
So there are a couple different ways I'm going to talk about challenges. The first is there's so many things about my job that are fulfilling, and there's some that are just heartbreaking. And this is the crux of what I'm navigating now because, there's been some positives and some recovery coming out of the pandemic. But every day I look at data and it breaks my heart. You see, students that are still struggling. You see children who didn't have pre-K and didn't really learn some of the basic skills about being able to be in the classroom or learning to write. They didn't have the muscle strength to write their letters. And that impacted kindergarten, and that impacted first grade. And they just haven't caught up. And so there's some days when I come home and my heart is just so broken. And I keep thinking, okay, I want to drive change, and being satisfied with little bits of change sometimes versus, big things. So, that part of my job, as much as I love it, I'm like, okay, how much, in this environment, I know myself, how much can I keep doing that, knowing I'm making a contribution when it's also, taking a lot out of me emotionally sometimes. The next challenge is figuring out what's next. It'll be out of my control once we fully move here and they start a search for my replacement when that person will show up. And so, I will have relatively little notice about when I'm done, and I'm not ready to stop, but I don't really know if I want to go into this kind of job again in education or if I want to find something different as a way to channel my energy. I'm not ready to just do nothing. So could be a full-time volunteer, but where do I want to channel that energy? So that's, I'm not thinking too much about that now because I don't really know when it's going to happen, but I know that is what I'm setting myself up for. And then on a personal front, I have to say I've been blessed that I've not been in the sandwich generation. I didn't have young children at the same time I was dealing with aging parent needs to a great extent. But, my children now are, in their 20s and fully independent. And I'm navigating now, the challenges with my mom's health. And that's just hard. It's hard. I'm now here in Colorado where both of my brothers are, but my mother's in Massachusetts and she doesn't want to move. But she's just, not doing well where she is. And so trying to figure out how to honor what she wants, but, do right by her, but also make sure that she's well cared for is very difficult now. have a lot of sleepless nights about that one.
Yeah. I I feel that. And do you have any siblings who are in the picture, or is it kind of all fall on you, the
Oh, both of my brothers here.
who are there, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So the three of us are all within now 2 miles of each other, which
So you're all there, but mom's way off in
Mom.
Massachusetts. Okay.
and adamant. I am not coming to
Adamant.
Colorado. And it's like, really? Come on.
Why do
Do it.
parents get so stubborn?
Yeah.
They get so, and I hear the story over and over and over again, right? Just like, I'm not leaving my house. I'm not going to stop driving. I'm not ready for assisted living.
I don't want anyone to come in to help me. I don't want, I don't want, I don't want. All I want to do is, be here. It's like an up with the book, the house and weighing him down. But no, I'm very fortunate. My brothers, we're a great team. We all bring different strengths to navigating this, and so no, it's thank goodness that no, it's not falling on me at all. In fact, if anything, I feel like I need to be doing more because my brothers are doing some heavy lifting. So they're better able to talk with my mother than I am. I'm the only daughter, and so our conversations are a bit more charged sometimes.
Understood. Right. Understood. But it feels like it's one of those inflection points again, like you reached several times in your life. And when you're in that inflection point, you're sort of in that uncertainty, right? That kind of, it feels a little unsettling until it plays out, right? Until you kind of get through it, which you always have. So that of course will be the trend again. Like the what's next and where to go from here. And all I can say is Colorado's lucky to have you. I don't know what's next, but I know it's going to be amazing because God, like what a set of superpowers you have, and care, like you. What I do know about you, having met you and through Peter, is that you are really one of the most genuinely caring people, and that I could hear, and I felt it when you were talking about like how hard it must be seeing what's happening in the educational system and the impact of the pandemic and on a generation of kids. And that's a tough one. Like that's not something anybody can solve overnight. And that's got to be hard to deal with. But inside of all that, Liz, how do you manage? What are some of the ways you're currently managing stress? Or you said a lot of sleepless nights over that. And I get that. I totally get the sleepless night thing. How do you do self-care? How are you managing some of that?
So I definitely prioritize exercise. That is critical. I'm a walker now. I used to be a runner, but just getting outside, and that's one of the things I love about Colorado is just getting out, walking up a mountain, looking around, taking deep breaths. But that's been a big stress reliever for me. And the other is, I have one of the things that's influenced me the most, and this is from 25 years ago, was Stephen Covey's book. I believe it was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, of this whole sphere of influence and sphere of control. And I keep always trying to, understand, okay, all these things are going on and they're affecting me, but what can I control? And okay, my mom doesn't want to move. What can I control? I can make her move. Okay. Or I can, accept that, maybe some things are going to happen that are going to be really awful and sad, but that's what she wants. And part of, I think one of my strengths is I don't look backwards on my decisions. I try to look at, this is the analytical mind I have, is okay, what are all my options? How do I make the best decision I can at the time and move forward from there and not look back with regret? So, a lot of what I do is I don't beat myself up for my decisions. If I make a mistake, I acknowledge it and I move on and try to figure out how to fix it from there. And all of those, it doesn't necessarily make it easier for me to sleep at night sometimes. I mean, I spend a lot of time scenario planning. But, that's ultimately when I make a decision, I move on from that and, then scenario plan the next one. So,
Are you the I have to watch TV to fall asleep or get into like a mindless TV show like The Bachelorette, or are you like
I read nonfiction most of
you
the
didn't read
time.
it
Yeah.
fiction? Okay, there you go.
I read fiction, I get so caught up in the plot, then I don't sleep. If I read history or something boring or biographies, then usually that can put my mind at rest.
That's what does it. That's fantastic. Well, you shared one resource that the book, The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and and what are some other resources throughout your life that you feel like have been, or even recently, like you said, exercise, the book, daily habits. Is there anything else or any other resources you feel like you would want to share with somebody to say, like, this is something I feel like everybody should be doing, or everybody should be reading, or everybody should, look into, or a course you should take, or you go from there. Are there any resources that you could share with the listeners?
So I think the first one to me is community and people. Like
Mm.
I get more by admitting I don't know and asking other people when I need help for ideas than reading books because most of the time, and that's where, I looked around in my neighborhood, everybody's going through similar things. How do we help each other? In my workplace, we were all navigating raising kids and working at different stages. And it's like, okay, what are you doing? What's working for you? I might not do anything but it sparks different ideas. So building that community and getting ideas from other people and from their lived experience has, really been the most helpful for me. The couple books I've read have been because I had to for a course at work. And that one's the only one that really stuck with me of all my corporate education. I think realizing nobody does this alone. Nobody gets through life alone. And, one of the things I'm anxious to be full-time in Colorado about is building a new community here. I mean, I certainly have my brothers and their friends who've been so welcoming to us, but it's like, okay, I want to build my next community. Uh,
I want to be
because
part of your community. I do, but I mean,
my retirement cohort community. So, well, who's navigating this next stage and how are they doing it? And how are they, taking advantage of all of that's here, both in serving, the community here and volunteering, but also taking advantage of the lifestyle here. So anyway, that's probably, for me, the biggest resource is, whether you call them sponsors, mentors, friends, but most importantly, just not trying to, be the metaphors of the duck of everything, you're going smooth, but you're paddling like hell underneath. It's like, just admit that you need a little help or you're struggling. And then when you're vulnerable like that, all of a sudden you realize, everybody else is dealing with stuff and they're doing things and they found solutions that you might not have even been aware of.
Beth, I feel like you just described Spark Me, right, Liz?
Absolutely. I was just going to say
Exactly. And what you're doing is great.
that is exactly. Yeah. I was just going to ask one more question. Recently, I was away for a long weekend with a bunch of women, and one of the women had her daughter with her, and she was 21 years old. And to see life through a 21-year-old's eyes again, and how everything is just awesome and amazing, and and the world is their oyster. And I thought to myself, how when you get older and the challenges of life start weighing on your shoulders, how do you get back to that feeling of, life is all open and out there for you? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing is for that 20-year-old, 21-year-old, when they hit their first obstacle, to realize that, you're going to have ups and downs. And I think, for me at least, one of the first things that, really hit me was, going off to college and having been an excellent student in high school, getting the worst grades of my life my very first semester. I mean, I really thought I was going to flunk out. And, it was like, oh my God, the sky is falling. I could have given up. And I didn't, I worked through that. And that's, when my um, mentor students, because this is a very typical path for anybody in the STEM fields, but women in particular, you're going to hit bumps. And it's like, okay, stop, don't give up, look around, you've got options. And, that's happened to me several times where, my what I saw was nirvana became, pretty quickly disillusioned or hit a bump where I was disillusioned. And, you gotta go through that pain, but then you gotta step back and look around and go, hey, this is not the end of the world. There's lots of other possibilities out there, and regain that optimism again, because it's only when you open your eyes that you see them. If you're looking down and not looking up, you're not going to see what's ahead of you. And so, that's, what I've tried to embrace and get through quickly the downside so you can open up and look at the possibilities and keep that optimism. But everybody faces that. That 21-year-old is going to hit something at some point. It might be next month, it might be 10 years from now, but, regaining and holding on to that optimism is really key of navigating everything in life. And, I wish I'm not perfect, clearly. I've, gone through some, times when I'm like, oh man, that was just not a fun time for me or anybody else around me, but try to get through those quickly so that you can get to the other side.
Wow, I love that.
So, Beth, this has been amazing. And to kind of close out our incredible interview and conversation with you, we want to do a lightning round, which we are absolutely admitting that we are stealing from the Actor Studio. Thank you very much, Janice Lifton. But we'll mix our questions up a little bit, right? So just a few quick questions. What is the best advice your parents ever gave you?
Don't give up.
Simple. Love it.
Yeah.
All right. If you could be an expert in any other field overnight, what would it be?
Neuroscience.
Oh.
I just love understanding how the brain works. I would say neuroscience and then immunology, just like understanding. I don't think I would want to be a doctor, but those two fields I find really intriguing.
Cool. What television show is your guilty pleasure?
Oh my God. Well, Emily in Paris. Yes.
Love it.
What is one book you think everybody should read?
Gonna sound really weird. But the biography of Ulysses S. Grant by the guy who wrote Hamilton, I think it was. I never learned that much about that period of history. After, we only studied up always till the Civil War. And that period of after the Civil War and Reconstruction has so many eerie parallels to now. There's just a whole bunch of history that I learned that has been erased. And anyway, it was one of those books, I read nonfiction at night, fall asleep. I could not put it down. And, I thought the battles would put me to sleep and all that, but it was just understanding that time and what our country went through.
Yeah.
And then what our country went through again through Reconstruction, the sparks of positivity, then, huge swaths of awfulness. Anyway, it's a
that's
fascinating book.
All right.
Very cool.
Gonna read that one. Okay, what is something that irritates you like nails on a chalkboard?
When people scrape utensils against their teeth.
That's a new one. It's almost like nails on a chalkboard.
It is.
Or about utensils on the teeth. The dinner party when you hear it. Well, that's some hard enamel. What's one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
It's funny. I did this letters to my younger self. This whole get back to others early. The lift as you climb. At some point in my life, I figured out it wasn't just all about me. You do well by all rising together. It took me longer than I wished it did. So I would have told my younger self to look around you. That community is going to be important. I don't think anyone who I went to high school would believe me that was become a mark of who I am. I wish I had done that earlier.
And last one. What is one problem that you believe a small group of committed women can fix within a year?
I think you can make a difference in an elementary school in your area in helping any child K through 2 learn to read by helping giving them one-on-one time. They need lots more one-on-one time.
That's
That's
one.
great.
Love it. That's right at the base, right where it all happens. So, Beth, this has been amazing.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So much
I
fun.
learned so much in this hour. Oh my goodness. We're really letting it. My mind is, lift as you climb and look up, not down. I mean, so much positivity, so many great lessons, advocating for yourself. You are an amazing and inspiring woman, Beth.
I already knew that, and Liz just learned that in this short conversation. It's like you can't know you and not think that instantly,
Thank you for what you are doing. You are also for what you're bringing to the world and to women. This is just fabulous. I love this concept.
Thank you. And we hope
Thank
to talk to
you.
you again. All
right,
right.
great.
Hope you'll come back sometime.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All I can say is if our listeners love this conversation as much as we did, because we really loved it, but we hope you did too. If you loved the conversation as much as we did, then we want you to know this isn't just a podcast. This is about building a community. And so we'd love you to reach out to us, and Liz will tell you how you can do that.
Yeah. So part of this, as Michelle said, is building our community, and we're going to do it at the grassroots level, one listener at a time. So, hey, if you're the first person to sign up, you're it. You're our community. You're, you're our people.
I'm like, are you going to offer something? I'll sign up first.
So I'd be that first person, but here's how you do it. You subscribe to our email list by going to our website at www.sparkmepodcast.com, where you can find exclusive content. We blog, we're creating Spark guides there, and we're creating ways for us to interact with you. And then you can also become a member of our community initially on Instagram. We have an Instagram page called Spark Me Podcast. We would love for you to follow us and to share with us what you like, what you didn't like, what you'd like to hear in the future. And just know that we're building this community out, and we are going to have opportunities to meet in person, virtually, and everything else we can think about.
Yeah, we're going to keep this conversation going. And I'm going to say something that's going to make my two kids cringe. Hit the like button if you smash that like button if you want.
We're the least emotional people that should ever start something that requires promotion.
I don't even know how to finish the sentence. They're like, no, Mom, no, stop. I'm like, sorry, guys.
Please like us.
That's what they all say. Okay, please like us. Please hit the button, please. Yeah, and so this is truly about you and creating something special and creating something that we're keep these conversations rolling. And I can't wait to meet our listeners. I can't wait to meet as many of you as possible. It's going to be awesome. So in the meantime, and until next time, we're going to try a cheesy sign off.
What is our cheesy sign off going to be today?
Let's see. Let's try. How about in the meantime, let's keep sparking joy, curiosity, and maybe just a little bit of mischief.